I would like to welcome our panel and get started. And I think a good place to start, having just read your biographies, is to ask each of you to introduce your practice outside of the realm of carpets. So Cornelia, why don't you give it a start?
Okay, I'm a contemporary art curator with an academic art historical background, and in about 1988 I made the plunge into living the life of the artist because I was working at the Guggenheim at the same time as Jill, and I had the opportunity to make my life and my profession coincide even more closely by marrying, in my first marriage, the artist Joseph Kosuth. And I'm very pleased to say that his sister is in the audience as well as his cousin. I basically have lived art on my own skin these 30 years that I've been working professionally. And this evening I'm very moved to be able to show you just a demonstration of how that works, because it's really all about family. And I have this lucky occasion to have my father in the audience, my brother, my sister, some of my closest colleagues and friends. And really the way art works is this kind of familial way. These two gentlemen here to my right are my brothers in art. We've been working together over 30 years as well. And we have a very, it's almost a non-spoken kind of understanding. What you'll see upstairs is the way I work with artists as well. It's mostly people I know, 80%, and that's how I have worked as a curator, really. It's a kind of a felt thing rather than a studied thing. Ken?
Well, I'm an artist who has a rather taciturn relationship to art. I like being in the art world, but I also always pose the question to me, what are the limits of being in the art world? Because I think there's a bit of a non-identity problem in terms of the idealisms which drew me to art, and yet the reality that is constituted by the art world. So I always have that, and as a result of that, it's just meant more work because I end up writing essays and curating and so on, trying not to so much see those activities as extending myself as an artist, but just to try to come closer to that question of what is art, trying to resuscitate or maintain a kind of a kind of fervor about art that I had when I first went into the art world.
Myself, I'm an artist. I kind of work against the stiffness of being a conceptual artist, but I am a conceptual artist in a way where I really respect pop art in a way that comes through in my object making. The recent work that I make is all about the art object. They are paintings, but I don't consider myself a painter. These are just art objects. And I can speak further about that later on.
Great, thank you. So I think the right place to start is with Cornelia and the simplest question, why carpets? How did this start for you, and how did this start for contemporary art?
Well, I think it's what Alan was just saying about the conundrum of conceptual art and a desire to push the legacy of conceptual art, as these two gentlemen have in their artistic practice, further as an art historian. And I feel that the way that conceptual art can be pushed along is to reintegrate discussions of the hand and manuality, because in our time we're losing many of the languages of craft and material culture all over the globe. And I feel that artists are really always the canaries in the tunnel to see where there are zones of risk or peril. And it's no accident that this field of textile by artists is absolutely exploding, because artists have a yearning and a nostalgia for the object, as Alan was saying. And each artist deals with it differently, and I'm dealing with it by presenting objects actually handmade, still in a conceptual mode for the most part, but actually handmade and felt pieces. And this is a different thing than the art by telephone, which maybe we would have known, more frequently 30 years ago. But this is a large discussion.
Talk a little bit about the one artist's work that's in the exhibition that's not a carpet, Guillaume Biel.
Well, in 1985, Guillaume Biel was invited to do an exhibition at the Stedelijk, a room like this, and he could have done any sort of monographic show, but what he chose to do rather than put his own things there, because that's not his practice, he paraphrases, well, he takes slices of life right off the street, as if he would take a hairdresser from down the street and install it here. And he's so attentive to every sculptural detail that it's better than theater and better than any kind of interior installation. It becomes life itself. So what he did in Holland was that he created a carpet showroom. And at that time, the issue of craft had not been one in the annals of contemporary art, nor was the issue of the so-called Orient or the Persian carpet something that was a contemporary art thing. And he was also turning the carpets into the kind of merchandise that the art of today is. So it's a little bit of dealing with the object and making a para-art world through this carpet showroom. But his relation to that is so fascinating, and basically he's given us a photo of that installation, and that photo has become an artwork upstairs. So it's a reflection of a reflection of a reflection, and in those reflections there's more truth than if we had an actual Islamic carpet on the ground.
So the exhibition upstairs has 30 artists, and then the exhibition catalog, which is available in our store, features over 60 artists, but in truth there are even more contemporary artists who are working in carpet. So talk a little bit, Cornelia, about the process of selecting artists and some of the artists that you chose as sort of centerpieces or progenitors for this practice, and any kind of structuring devices or framing questions that you use to sort of create relationships between these diverse objects upstairs.
I'm guided by my eye, and that goes to choice of music, choice of shoes, what the fabric is, how he buttons his jacket. I mean, this is the thing that I love so much about artists. They're absolutely perfect pitch in all of these things. Even a bouquet on the table becomes an artwork. And I chose these art pieces upstairs, which for me are artworks and carpets, for aesthetic reasons, and I think that shows because, I put the show together conceptually in a way that would also be pleasing to the eye. I don't think that art should really be a stick in the eye. I think it should be something that seduces, the beaux-arts, basically, a return to that.
So Ken, turning to you now, Ken wrote a wonderful essay for the catalog, and in that essay you discuss the carpet's significant position as a kind of in-between object, between figure and ground, between art and craft, between artist and weaver. In the case of many works in the exhibition, can you talk more about this idea, and in particular how it relates to your work or any other works in the exhibition?
Well, one of the central motifs in all of my work is this possibility of imagining otherwise, or imagining especially the subjectivity of others. So the idea of the alterity of the worker, of women, of children, their labor, and their under-regard is something that interests me, right? Because I think it's about, I guess it's a question of political economy, which interests me. Carpets are kind of interesting because they do kind of occupy kind of liminal space. It's a substrate we stand on, for example. And we, in a way, we don't pay it much mind. In the same way as something on the wall or something on the ceiling, which directs our gaze, right? It's more natural to be standing up or even sitting up and looking directly across or looking up because it's exalted. But to look down is to allegorize, I guess, purgatory or death, right? Because bodies get interred underneath the ground and so on. So in that sense, it's kind of symbolic relationship to purgatory, to hell, to death, and to the return to nature and so on, is something which gets, I think, a little bit repressed in terms of the division between art and craft, for example. Whereas there's a distinction between them, and yet there's much fluidity between them, and so it means there's a lot of rules that come into place to define that separation. So it's a kind of socially constructed separation, when perhaps it's much closer than we really realize. And so those types of questions it extends to my thinking in terms of my work and this exhibition.
Talk a little bit about the subject or the design within your carpet that initially appears somewhat as an abstracted maze, but actually has a deep origin. And then you give it a somewhat poetic title that also lifts it into another realm.
Well, it is a maze in the sense that there is, or a labyrinth, I should say. It's really more labyrinth than a maze. A maze, you really are lost and disoriented at some point, and you can't find your way out. But at some point, there is a added out, and there's an ingress point. And so I saw it as a kind of allegory of a passage, right? And that passage involves a very big middle section where it's disorienting, it's chaotic, it's stochastic. I'm just mindful you mentioned not to use the words. I'm trying to find another word for stochastic. Okay, okay. And so and so. And I see that as, and that's the great thing about art is that art is not just a kind of embodying process in terms of calling up the viewer, and the viewer kind of identifying or not identifying with components of the work, but it's also embodying in terms of certain values that the artist wants to impart, right? And I'm always interested in this question of not just the artist, what the artist makes, but also the life of the artist, right? As an allegory of the life of others. And so that's how I saw that maze or labyrinth.
Thank you. Alan, your recent work has focused a great deal on images of consumption, often paintings that feature luxury items like vintage wines, truffles, and oysters. Your work in Wall to Wall, however, uses a familiar ready-made object as the basis of a form, but one that is decidedly frugal. How does this work relate to your broader oeuvre, if at all, and how does this familiar object, which is in your carpet, how is it transformed through the work into potentially something else?
The thing is, the paintings that I've been doing are not about me being a painter, because I'm not a painter. They're about being art objects. And they're especially not about the value. They're more so about the animate of the painting as object. So they're just using either the truffle or the vintage wine or whatever subject that the painting's about to speak about the life of that object on the wall. So it's not specifically about the value, it's more so, many of them are about the keeping and the embracing of the work, rather than, lately it seems a lot of work is, well, we hate to use the word flipped, but either flipped or, just with the art fairs and things, that work has passed by very, very quickly. So these are objects that are very much about spending time with. So as much as I'm saying to spend time with this vintage wine and don't pop the cork, let it collect dust. And the same with the oysters, which have like a piece of broken glass on its fleshy part, is maybe keep it 20 years, you might get a pearl, And so when it comes to the dog chew rag carpet, I've also been painting just paintings of simple dog chews, and it's not just because we have a dog, but also because it's an object that is fascinating, that you don't want to let go, that you can really chew on, sort of thing. So it's not about the value of those subjects. It's all about the life of that art object.
So in the dog chew rag, it's been up here on the screen, you replicate it multiple times to create a circular pattern,
Yes.
which then has these alternative suggestions to it. Talk a little bit about how suddenly that object is transformed into other illusions, like a shield, I think, or a mandala.
Yeah, especially it almost appears like a mandala, because I was very conscious that this was being done in Nepal, in Kathmandu. So I liked that whole effect of it. And also it's the same almost color scheme as within the dog chew as well. But I also like that it also looks a little bit like those rag carpets that you just get at the hardware store. So it's taking this, luxury item, and still it has this feeling that, It could also just be something from IKEA
Right.
at the same time.
Nothing wrong with things from IKEA, by the way.
No, it could
For
be
anyone who
sponsored,
works for
I don't know.
IKEA, yeah. They sell a lot of carpets. This is actually a great transition to our next question, which is about the carpet making as a kind of relational practice. Unless you're both artist and weaver, it involves collaboration and delegation and is a kind of art production line. Cornelia, first, can you talk about this dynamic, the relationship between artist and weaver, and in some cases producer or director and artistic director in the middle, and perhaps use an example from the exhibition?
Yes, I can. There is a publisher in the audience here, I believe, Equator Production from New York, and yesterday there were other publishers. Basically, the artist doesn't create a carpet like you will see upstairs in the void, as with most art. Usually artists, like the rest of us, produce under the gun for a commission or for a job or for an exhibition or for a lecture. I mean, it's all done, you know, as everyone else works. And so in order to have a carpet produced, you need someone to give you that job or that task, and then the artist puts their head to it. And the publisher is the person who then distributes the piece and makes sure that it's communicated properly and framed in the world and advertised, and the whole surround around the piece, and that the artist is protected in exhibiting them, you know, not in a crass way, but in an elegant way, and the whole framing of the thing that gives it its value art historically as well as economically or socially in many ways. And the artist, basically, some artists get very involved with the actual weavers. They go to Guadalajara or they go and meet the weavers. Other artists may never know they're weavers and are not that interested, but they're very interested when they get their swatches. And if they don't correspond to exactly what they have in mind, that is rejected. And sometimes it can take years for a piece to actually see the light of day. I know that that the publisher of the Rosemary Trockle carpet is working on a second one. I think it's already been 3 years in the making for something that really, it's not like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I mean, it's just a rug, but it has to be perfect. And that kind of dedication, perfection, is also what heralds, you know, what typifies the great artwork. That's what I think you'll see upstairs, that in each case, that relation between the producer and the work and the weavers and the artist is kind of done to perfection on some level. All of these pieces are perfect objects upstairs, I would like to say very modestly, and I didn't make them.
As the artist who designed 2 carpets in the show, how did this process relate to or differ from your typical practice in terms of your relationship with the weaving of the object and your impressions of it after it was completed versus the idea that you had in your head? Whichever one wants to.
Well, I guess I used to be a sign painter before, when I was in my teens. I grew up next to a sign painter, so I used to paint like Monarch furniture, semi-annual sale. I painted, you know, 14-foot Davenport and so on, and or also Jean's Grill. You know, it was like I do little cards which you put on the window. It was always Salisbury steak on Monday, I remember, and so. I was always interested in this. I think that most artists are interested in this relationship. What is it art? What is it not art? And it's clearly not defined entirely by the client relationship or even the creative impulse. Because and I have a little boy, and he's always, you know, maybe it's obviously related to Pete, my son, but he'll walk around and he'll always say, "That looks like art, Dad. If that was art, that could be really good art." You know, and so on. No, but I think, you know, that's, of course, it's funny, right? But he's only 6, right? But at the same time, it's also true, right? Artists are always interested in this kind of question of, you know, when does it come into being as art? And so I have this, you know, and I feel the same way in terms of the carpets and so on, and craft people and so on. I actually have good training in terms of doing plaster, for example, working in plaster models, and so I do both now. I'm going back to my roots, and I may go back to sign painting as well, while kind of incorporating it back into my art, and so on. So that question, it doesn't really is not an otherwise question for me in terms of the relationship to what you know, carpet makers make, and so on, and but I also. So it's not different, let's say. I see it as something which is a central interest of mine.
For me, this is a very good question. First of all, as an artist, one of the things that you first learn is that as soon as you show a piece, as soon as you release a piece, that you have to have distance from it, because you do lose control over your work, be it with just the audience, critics, collectors, whatever. So the paintings that I make are made in China by Chinese painters. So first of all, I've got that distance from the work. So as much as I art direct and design the work, it's produced elsewhere and it's brought back to me. So already there's that distance, because it's never going to turn out exactly the way that I would do it, which gives me the extra freedom to release it, because I'm less attached to it as well. And when people ask me about this, but the paintings are made in China, I'm like, yes, it's the same as when I used to do photography work, and I would take the photograph and I would drop the negatives off at the photo lab and pick up the photos, and I would nail them to wood and to me it's the same operation, you know, that I'm dropping it off, I'm picking it up later, I hope it turns out well, and then I put it out in the world. And it's the same with the carpet. I mean, designing the carpet was a very long, involved process. I'm amazed that they were able to do my design, because I thought it was really rather complicated, and I thought they would turn it down, and they actually, you know, really took it on, and they did an amazing job, and I'm totally thrilled. But there's always that element of chance within it, which is exciting.
So Cornelia, coming back to you, you've speculated that this exhibition reveals a kind of watershed moment in contemporary art practice. Talk more about how the examination of artist carpets sheds light on broader shifts or practices in contemporary art today.
I think the issue of the manufacture of artworks is being defined on the level of names, and we will see a growing trend in the identification of the people who actually contribute to the making of an artwork. I see it in certain artists like Murakami, who will write an entire list of all the people who contributed to the making of an artwork. And I see it in the younger generation that produces works and identifies. It's sort of like in the gourmet cooking scene, where you know where the fish is from and the vegetables are sourced here and sourced there. I mean, people want to know where the components come from, and there's a certain kind of satisfaction in saying this was whittled in Pennsylvania by a wood carver and so on. I see that as a trend. And I also see that people are getting manually involved, despite what Alan is saying, but I see that people are actually developing a rationale for reintegrating their own hands into the making process. So you have artists like Andrea Zittel, who set up a loom in her desert, Mojave Desert compound, and is weaving herself. Or Paulina Orlovska, who has some, rudiment. I'm sure she did not weave that herself, but the Alexandra Keoglu, there's a whole generation also of women that are taking up weaving again, and I find that really interesting, because it is one of the most ancient, I wouldn't say professions or pastimes or what you would want to call it, but it's an ancient way to create visual culture, and I'm very interested in it in general, and I'm very happy to work with these very smart gentlemen on this ancient subject.
So we have time for some questions from the audience, if there are any. Yeah. I'll hand you my mic.
I do enjoy this very much. I am a scientist for decades, 6 decades. And I am not only the scientist for 6 decades, but I'm the father of the curator, Professor CORNELIA LAUF. So I'm very proud. But one question struck me when Cornelia said, that it will be given to the publisher to be published. My question is, what is in the arts, the vetting process of what is good and what's not good? In the sciences, we have to undergo a rigorous review when we want to publish. And if we don't make it, we may not publish a paper. So this is a question which I have to you guys here. How do you control quality?
Wow. Who wants to take that one on?
I'll take it on. Because I think that very question is a question that is what makes art so fascinating, is that the whole basis of art, in a way, is to align that question. So that question, in terms of bounding the process of signification, manufacturer signification, to metrics of science or metrics of some kind of evaluative measurement, is not central, right? That the meaning that's accrued to a work of art actually is quite mutable and starts changing and in context and works that we think were very, very good at 10 years ago. We look back and say, you know, maybe it wasn't so good, right? And that may not be so true in science, but in art, that's always true. And so it's a kind of a parallel universe, and that's not diametrically opposed to the principles of science, but it's otherwise from science, and because of that, that's what gives it its life, I would say.
Any other thoughts? That was a really solid answer.
Only that there's a lot of art for me that I want to have a message. So as long as it conveys the message, then that's paramount.
I just also want to quickly add that art is essentially about a theory of the subject, right? How we form ourselves as subject, subjectivity, right? How we can imagine a world, and so because of that, it can never be, held down to principles of science and so on.
Are there other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
As I listen to you talking about the publisher and the folks who commission works and the artist's relation to them, I'm wondering, and I wonder if you would care to comment on the shaping influence of a privileged elite who form a very small segment of society and are oppressive to the rest of us. What is their shaping influence on art?
I don't understand completely. If you could just rephrase that.
Sure. We have folks that are providing publishing or commissions. And you had said that the artist works in response to this opportunity. Clearly the resources to be the publisher or the commissioner are not equally distributed in our society. So would any of you care to comment on the shaping influence of the small group that has the resources to do this on the world of art?
Well, actually, one of the publishers of a carpet upstairs drove here in his car from New York yesterday. I don't know if that's a 10-hour drive rather than, I'm sure, take a very expensive flight. I think that most publishers, whether it's books or carpets, are operating on very tight budgets and very tight margins. It's not a highly lucrative profession to start with, so I don't think that it's really a question of them being in some kind of an elite field. Publishing by nature is a very difficult way to make money because you're operating with multiple things. You're not creating one rarefied object that you can jack up the price to. You're by nature offering a sort of democratic thing. And offering a carpet is not the same thing as creating, a unique jewel that has some kind of rarefied aspect. So I would debate whether this is a very elite crowd, the people that are creating these types of things. And in general, I don't feel that the art world is an exclusive society at all. I feel that anyone who decides to be in it, can be in it. It's extremely democratic, quite frankly. David Robbins always said that you just have to decide, you know, once you decide you're in it, you're in it. I mean, it's not as if you need an invitation to be in the art world. So I've never seen it as me versus them or some kind of club. I mean, you decide to be part of that discussion and you start discussing. And the same goes for commissioning things. I've learned for many years living in Rome and in Italy that it's very natural to commission things. People, if they want to have a chair, they don't go out and buy it. They actually have the chair made for them the way they want. And most often it's less expensive than going and buying it in a design showroom. It's just a way of life. You know, in Europe, I was saying yesterday, it's very common to deal with artisans, or if you want your letterhead done, or to manufacture things as you want it, and that's also not seen as something that's elite. Now it is to have yourself a pair of shoes made or have a suit made, but 30 years ago, everyone had their shirts tailored or their jackets cut for them and so on. And so on some level, things now that are precious are only so because of the time we live in, and it's an elite that knows about it, but not really maybe an economic elite. Per se. I mean, we're all here on this panel, we're completely self-made, and most of the people I know in the art world, you know, just built it with their own two hands. I mean, look at the museum that we're in. That has been stamped out of the ground with a lot of effort. It hasn't exactly come in. This is all manufactured with a lot of labor. So. Right, but it is, it's all built on, you know, hard, humble work, and not, I don't see even very wealthy people whom I know some of. I know people that are poor and I know people that are rich, but even the wealthiest people I know don't exactly have easy lives, and wealth comes with a lot of responsibility. I don't know many galleries that in this day and age aren't counting their bottom line, you know. Really,
we have a question back here. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Francisco, and my brother and I both attend Cleveland School of the Arts just down the street. And I guess my question for all three of you is, what would be, per se, your perspective on how to move on forward as an artist for upcoming such as my brother and myself?
Advice to the emerging young artist.
I would say that nowadays there's never been more interest in art, which makes it easier, I would say, for young artists to enter into the art system, because it is a system which is, when I say system, I don't mean it's like it has boundaries that are fixed. The boundaries are constantly shifting, and so it's easier to get in a way than when I started. But I would say paradoxically that was probably, it was harder for me to get into the art world because there weren't so many, it was a lot smaller. There weren't so many artists of color when I started as well, to be frank. And but it was also easier once you got in to stay in it. Now it's probably harder to stay in it, right? Plus, I would say that be open to, falling in love with something which may be not even art, right? Along the way, if you want to make art, and then that's fine. You want to be an artist, but then if, let's say, you're in the art world, you encounter something which is, you think, wow, this is actually more interesting for me than art. I would say, do not foreclose that possibility of pursuing that path. Right? I grew up, when I was much younger, art was always seen mythically as the ultimate and highest calling. Right? There's nothing that could challenge the status of art. But I think art itself it's wonderful, but it also has many compromising aspects to it. Not least of all the business of art, the big money aspect of art, the corruption of art, the laundering of money to auction houses, all that sort of stuff, right? So that's my advice, right? If you love art, you have to make a leap of faith to get into art and make art, but don't foreclose every other possibility that may come along. And maybe that will actually make it even more convincing for you to stick it out in art.
Okay, we have one more question.
I just wanted to address the fact that there was a difference between science and art. As a matter of fact, I am a scientist as well, so I think I need to clarify a little bit this concept. We know that in the past, great scientists were also great artists. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and many others. So, although I agree with you that yes, there is a difference, and perhaps how does art, or how is the quality control of art happens, I would say the public and time are the best judges to decide what is high quality. But also, I wanted to address that there is not such a big difference between science and art. Because in science, there is a lot of creativity, there is inspiration, there is innovation. It's very much like what happens in art. And I'm fascinated in this exhibition because I can see how different cultures get together and create something new. And the same phenomenon is happening in science, where many different sciences are getting together and we are creating very new, different types of products that are not that different from the artistic world. I just wanted to clarify this.
Can I just make one comment that as someone who has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, which is true, and the fact that I wrote a paper in the Canadian Entomological Journal that was actually referenced by COSUTH in his PhD, who's another famous artist, right? I'm not sure my point is, just to say that I have a
You're
science
a scientist
background.
as well.
I'm not a scientist, but I have a science background.
Okay, so this is incredibly interesting, and the conversation can continue very happily because our night has not ended. Before we move into another part of our evening, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists, CORNELIA LAUF, Catalano, and Belgium.